Kansas State moves to 4-0, but man, was it close.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rao, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Now part of the number one sports podcast network. Welcome back to my everydayers, and we are breaking down Kansas State just sneaking past Tulsa 84-83. They moved to 4-0 on the season. This was a game that they went against another undefeated team in Tulsa, another high-scoring team that came into this game averaging 90 points per game. It should have been a game that was not as close as it was. We're going to break that down all on this episode. Before we do so, though, this episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's with Gametime. 84-83. They went into the locker room with a 5-point lead. They wound up being outscored 49-45 in the second half. And to be honest, if it wasn't for some kind of boneheaded moves by Tulsa at the end of the game, kind of throwing up our prayer that turned into a turnover that Kansas State got to recover to kind of get the ball back and get the possessions and the lead back for themselves with seconds to go, Kansas State was in trouble in losing this basketball game. But overall, PJ Haggerty steps up when he's needed the most. He does it against his former team in the Tulsa Golden Hurricane, who he played for 2 seasons ago before transferring to Memphis and then ultimately transferring to Kansas State this season. When I mean he showed up, he absolutely showed up, got a double-double, 29 points, 10 rebounds. He was 9 for 16 from the field, 11 from 12 from the charity strike. Overall, he played a very, very good game. Had 5 turnovers, wasn't 7, wasn't 8 like we've talked about in the past. If you remember my past reaction shows, I have said that if PJ Haggerty limits his turnovers to 5 to less, I think they win this basketball game. So far, I'm 2-0 in that conversation, at least for that type of narrative. Let's see if that continues, how long that continues this season. But I have a feeling when it's all said and done, it'll be a winning record for the Kansas State Wildcats. It was a tough game for Kansas State. They definitely didn't shoot well, and I think that's probably the biggest test and the biggest thing you can take away from this game is that when the shooting doesn't go right for Kansas State, how are they going to step up? And in this case, you're playing a team that also can shoot very good, averaging 90 points per game. You still find a way to get yourself in the 80s, even though you only shot 44% from the field. And most importantly, you only shot 5 for 24 from behind the arc. You shot 21% from behind the three-point line. And entering this game, you were leading the country in 3 points makes, 3-point percentage, right? You knew this wasn't going to last forever. You knew they weren't going to shoot 50% from 3 the entire season. So this is almost one of those blessing in disguise things where it happens against an opponent, not a Big 12 opponent, where you can kind of get the idea and figure out, okay, how are we going to respond when it's just not our night shooting? And I think it's a great time that it happened right after that second half in Cal, where they kind of let up on the gas and they had to figure it out this entire game against Tulsa because they struggled. They didn't have Moby Ike-Ruke in this game. From what I am gathering from certain reports, he was out with an ankle injury. That is not confirmed. I have not heard the exact reason, but what I've gathered, it was from an ankle injury. That's why he'd not play in this one. Taj Manning stepped up, got 7 minutes in his absence. We saw him for the first time really in this stretch of play. And they played 10 players. They played 10 players in this matchup. You saw Kostick, Manning, Buka, Jones, and Castillo all come off the bench. And you had a nice, your normal, usually starting 5 at the moment. Rapik, McGriff, Bashir Jr., Haggerty, and Johnson were your starting 5. That's probably what you're going to get the whole season. I have a feeling that's going to be your starting 5. Maybe Castillo will break it a few times, but I think they really like him coming off the bench to take care of either Bashir or Haggerty for some extra minutes. And Castillo's been very great. He continues to shine. He continues to show that he is that really a dominant force off the bench. He had 12 points in this one, was 4 for 10 from the field, only 1 for 5 from three-point land, and he was 3 from 3 for the charity strike. And if you're David Castillo and you're getting double-digit points and that 3 ball's not falling for you, that just shows how impressive the rest of your game has been compared to last year, right? When you paid attention to Dave Castillo last year as a freshman, if his 3-point shot wasn't going, you knew it was a bad night for David Castillo. And that happened a lot last year when he actually had any type of opportunities. And now that we're seeing him get 20 plus minutes a night, he's finding it to actually work out in his favor. And this was probably one of his worst nights of the season so far. If you wanted to put it in perspective compared to the Cal game, compared to some of the other games that they played so far this season, and he still found a way to get 12 points off the bench. He led the bench players with that 12 points. Kostick had 5, and then the rest of the players, Manning, Buka, and Jones, all had 2. So everybody that played had some sort of contribution to the points, and that's huge. And that's probably a shout out to Matthew Driscoll, who continues to get this team scoring and doing great things. This is the lowest they scored all season, 84 points. It's not the close to 100 like they've had almost all season, but it's a win. And they moved to 4-0 on the season, and that is absolutely huge. When you remember what they were last year in non-conference play, they weren't 4-0. I mean, heck, they weren't even 3-0. Last week after the win against Cal, that was their first 3-0 start since 2022. Now you move to 4-0, and you have a big matchup coming up later on in the week, and that's something that really will ultimately test them before their the two biggest non-conference games of the season. I think this one coming up, which we're going to get to in just a minute, is probably the third on the priority list for toughest non-conference matchups, and definitely the most toughest that they've faced so far this season. Tulsa played good, though. They were 41% from the field. They were 27% from three-point land. They stuck around. I don't know if playing good was the right actual thing, but they stuck around, and that's all that mattered. And this is a team that obviously had probably a little bit of chip on their shoulder coming into Manhattan. Everybody talking about the former player of Tulsa and PJ Haggerty and how PJ Haggerty was going to make a statement game, and he did. He absolutely did. But I'm sure some of these players on Tulsa wanted to make a name for themselves as well. Miles Barnstable was probably their best player of the night. He definitely led the team in points with 18. He shot 6 for 16 from the field, 4-11 from three-point land. And towards the end of the game, when they were trying to make a play to get that final shot for Tulsa to take the lead, they were trying to get it to Barnstable. So it sounds like he's their best player. So we can maybe put a watch on him if you think Tulsa is a team that maybe could make some noise in their conference, maybe to make it to the tournament as one of those dark horse mid-major teams later on this season. I think they're a good team. I think it'll be fun to see how they end up, but they are nowhere near what Kansas State is, in my opinion. I think this is a game that if we played them later on, if we played them in January, this Kansas State would win this game by 20 points. There's still just a lot of things that need to get figured out with this offense. The defense is still trying to figure out their things. I think the defense is getting better game by game, even with the woes they had in the second half against Cal, and even with having Tulsa stick around, even on a not so great shooting night. I think the defense is getting a lot better, and there's a lot to prove. But the biggest issue that I have over the last two games is the fact that they cannot close the game. They can't close out, right? You're up by so much against Cal in the first half, and then you wind up having to kind of go down to the wire. And then in this game, you were seconds away from losing this one. You could easily be looking at a 2-2 men's basketball team instead of a 4-0. You could say, yeah, they closed out, they won the game, but I think you get where I'm getting at. This is a Big 12 team with NCAA tournament aspirations. You shouldn't be going down to the wire with Tulsa. You shouldn't really even be going down to the wire with Cal. So there's a lot of things that I'd like to see them improve on, and they'll have plenty of time to do so before they get the Big 12 play, because there is plenty of good competition still left on the schedule. A couple other things that I want to get to, and then we're going to move forward and look ahead for what's next to Kansas State. We'll do that right here, all on Locked On Kansas State. But first, this episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of a game or want to ride that hot hand, well, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting. That's what I love the best about it, especially when your team's making that late push. And I know we're talking NBA on this little promo here, but speaking of this one, if you've play the live bet. I'm sure there was probably a time where Kansas State was plus odds in this one because Tulsa had a little bit of an advantage, especially in that beginning of the second half. Kansas State had to have a nice run to get themselves back into really consideration in this one. Right now, FanDuel's giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when that first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com and sign up today. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I appreciate it if this is your first listen of the day. And if you're an everydayer, I thank you a second fold. If you haven't already hit that subscribe button, bringing you Wildcat coverage like no one else every single day. And we're breaking down the men's team getting a win, right? 84-83. And this is the lowest scoring that they've had all season by really a mile. I mean, UNC Greensboro was their lowest one before heading into this one, the season opener, where they had 93 points. They won 93-64. This is the first time they did not get into the 90s this season. And this is the closest matchup by far, only winning by 1 point, of course. And that one was beaten by the game just last week against Cal, where they only won by 3, 99-66. Speaking of Cal and speaking this game against Tulsa, those are two games that they, in my opinion, especially the Cal game, because how they were so hot in the first half, you should have won this by a lot of points. And, give Tulsa credit where credit's due. They stuck around, and college basketball, anyone's night. That's why we played the game. That's why there's 64 teams in the tournament, because of Cinderellas. And this would have been definitely an upset, even though both teams were undefeated heading into this one. But they can't close. They're struggling to close, and I think that's a huge issue, especially on who's on the schedule coming up on Thursday and then later on next week. The next two games are going to be a true test for Kansas State, and I want to get to that in just a second. But just to round out the couple other notes I had from this game, 84-83 against Tulsa. Koshik only had 5 points coming off his 10 minutes. He was 2 for 5 from the field, 1 for 3 from the 3-point. I feel like there's some issues with him down low as well. I'd like to see him get a little bit more, whether practice or coaching, whatever it is, look at the tape of making some more contested shots when he's getting trouble down low, driving the lane. Because it seems like he's giving up multiple points this season so far at the rim. And I'd like to see that get fixed. Again, Koshik's a guy coming over from the international, definitely trying to translate himself into this new game of Big 12 basketball. And I've mentioned that before. We've seen it with Buka, Rapik. We've seen it with some of these other players. When you go from international basketball to Big 12 basketball, that's a jump in the direction of you're improving, not going down. And it might not seem that way. You think international, you think Olympics, you think that's a higher level. That's not always the case. And in this case, you're definitely making a jump into the right direction. There's a reason these guys came to Kansas State to try and get NBA ready. And I think that's one that you have to look at with Koshik. I'd like to see him get a little bit more aggressive and finish at the rim, because you could make the argument that he's probably left maybe 14, 16 points at the rim already this season, even in his limited minutes, something that I'd like to see him get way more minutes. Don't get me wrong. I think he is an extreme talent. And if that gets fixed, I think you do see him get more minutes, and that will make this team even more electric. Kamari McGriff continues to shine. He had 9 rebounds in this one. Nate Johnson had 9 rebounds, and PJ Haggerty had 10. And that's a big win. When you're seeing multiple players step up on the rebounding department, that was an issue in the Cal game, where they only lost the rebounding battle by 1 in the Cal game last week, but they only had like 20-something rebounds. And the leading rebounder against Cal was David Castillo coming off the bench. And this one, you actually won the rebounding battle, 40-38, and you stepped up. You had multiple players on your team getting close to double digits in rebounds, and you had PJ Haggerty actually get those double digits in rebounds and got himself a double-double. I really like what I'm seeing from Kamari McGriff. I think the last 2 games he's really stepped up and really started to shine. He had 13 points, 4 for 6 from the field, 5 for 6 from free throw, and those 9 rebounds, including 3 offensive rebounds, which I think are huge. The second chance points is what really kept Tulsa in this basketball game, especially in the beginning of this one in the first half. Tulsa was not getting good shots, as mentioned, when you're only shooting 41% from the field, but they were getting terrible shots initially in that first half, but they were getting second chances and then capitalizing on those second chances, whether it came from a rebound and then finishing at the hoop or going to the free throw line. I believe the first 13 points, if I remember correctly, is either 13 or 15 points. Apologize, I don't actually remember the number on that one. All came from second chance points to begin the game for Tulsa. So Another thing, the first 4 minutes with Kansas State, trying to obviously get yourself a better rhythm, better momentum. First 4 minutes has always been a struggle for Kansas State under the Jerome Tang era. I still think that's something they need to improve on, and that's something that they need to focus on, not just on the offensive side, but being aggressive, getting those defensive rebounds, and limiting those second chance points, something that Tulsa did a good job, especially at the beginning of this game against Kansas State. Abdi Bashir didn't have to do much in this one. I would have liked to see more from him, but he only shot 2 for 6 from the 3-point land, 4 for 12 from the field, and only had 10 points in his 28 minutes. And that's what you're probably going to get from an Abdi Bashir when it's a bad shooting night all around. You only saw him with a couple points against Cal, even though the team was on fire, but everybody else was stepping up around him. Bashir was cold in this one, shooting 2 for 6, but everyone was cold, so he didn't really stick out. We kind of saw this with Hassan last year a few times, where when he struggled, the entire team struggled. I'm not saying that's what happened to Abdi Bashir, but I feel like if he struggles, then the rest of the team can pick him up a lot better. And we saw that, like PJ Haggerty can step up. When Hassan last year struggled, I didn't feel like we had that person who could step up, and help out this team the way that I feel like there are multiple players on the roster this year that can do that. So although Bashir, Jerome Tang saying he's the best shooter in the country, has had a couple off nights, I still don't think that changes this. I think he is still one of the better shooters in the country. And when the stats finish off this season, it'll probably end up that way. But just a rough night overall for Bashir with only 10 points. And again, if you're still getting double digits and we're considering that a rough night, when you go back to last year's team and you're talking about what rough nights actually consisted of compared to what rough nights are now, you're in night and day situation. It's a really good feeling, at least to be in that spot, right? So that's where I'm trying to hang my hat out this early, because we're still learning this team. We're still trying to figure out what their identity is. Yeah, we know they can score, but this game they were tested a little bit in that scoring department. So their defense had to step up, and they were trialed and tested, and ultimately they got the win, and they moved to 4-0. And this win, although it's only a 1-point victory against the Tulsa Golden Hurricane, that one win could be the deciding factor of whether they're a bubble team or not when we get into the season later on, coming into the NCAA tournament. They were only a few games away from making the tournament last year. They were a bubble team till weeks before the season was over, and it really, because of the non-conference schedule, is what kept them out. This one win, the win against Cal, the win against Tulsa, these ones right here can ultimately help them get to that next direction. So you take the win where you can. Might be ugly, might be the fact that they can't close out, but they'll find ways to do that. I have faith in Matthew Driscoll. I have faith in Jerome Tang, and I really have faith in this roster. I really like what this coaching staff has brought up so far. And the fact that you're still playing 10 players, and you might have played 11, Taj might have got some minutes, who knows, if Moby was playing. But either way, you play 10 players still when you are 4 games in the season and you're playing tougher non-conference opponents. That shows that they believe in the depth of this team, and that's very important. I'll be excited and interested to find out how many players they play over the next 2 games, because the talent level and the competition level is going to be really high. And the way that they shot tonight against Tulsa will not go in the right direction. They will not get a W. They'll hit their first loss of the season if they do that on Thursday. Let's talk about that next. Let's talk about what's next for this team right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, this episode of Locked On Kansas State is brought to you by Gametime. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited. The tailgates, the rivalries, the energy in the stands, there's nothing like it, but let's be real. Actually getting tickets can feel more like a battle than the game itself. With endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout, that's why I have used in the past, and I continue to use, Gametime. It's the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to score last-minute tickets at the best price with no surprise fees. What you see is what you pay, and that's the ultimate best feature by far. I've pulled up Gametime in the past, and in just a few taps, I'm talking amazing deals. I have seen college football tickets, college basketball tickets, you name it, for as low as $25, and sometimes it gets even lower when you get closer to game time. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets or college basketball tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Gametime today. So Kansas State sneaks by. They get the win. They move to 4-0, and that's the biggest and most important part of this entire conversation, this entire reaction here right on Locked On Kansas State. I appreciate you listening. Thank you so much for using your time to listen and join the therapy session that we have every single day right here on Locked On Kansas State, now part of the #1 podcast network, the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And what's next is the biggest thing. After taking down Tulsa, you got some big games coming up. You have the Hall of Fame Classic on Thursday against Mississippi State. And Mississippi State's been 2-1 this year. This one's in Kansas City at the T-Mobile Center. And you're looking for taking down an SEC win, right? See, can you take care of an SEC team? That'll be a big thing right off the bat. Can you do that? And if you can, then I think that you're maybe talking a little different about this team. One thing that you have to put in mind, though, is that if they shoot the way they shot tonight against Tulsa, this game will probably not be close. Now, Mississippi State does not shoot as good as Tulsa does, at least in the eyes of points per game, compared to what Tulsa did coming in with 90 in this game compared to what Mississippi State is going to come into it. They only average about 80 points per game, but they do average 44 rebounds. They got some tall guys on their team, and one of those tall guys is Achor. If you remember, he was dismissed from Kansas State last year after playing only a few games from the program. In the 3 games so far with Mississippi State, he's playing 16 minutes. He's averaging just over 5 points per game, but he's averaging 7 rebounds. So he's finding a way to make some sort of presence for his team. And I believe he's tied for first. He's tied for first in rebounds on the squad in just his 16 minutes of play. So you're talking about, a rebound every 2 minutes of play for Achor. That's pretty impressive. So what he's getting. So of course, that was one of the biggest reasons why he came to Kansas State last year, to try and fix the rebounding issues. And that didn't work out for, obviously, in the issues that happened, the dismissal for the second year in a row and under Jerome Tang's coaching staff. Hopefully that doesn't happen this year, because this roster looks really good. But that's something to keep in mind. So you go from PJ Haggerty playing his former team to now the flip side, where Kansas State will have a former player with Achor, Mississippi State. There's always some sort of storyline. We had one with Cal, we had one at Tulsa, and now one at Mississippi State. And that's going to be a huge game. I think it's really going to be able to test who is ready to go. If you can take care of an SEC team, although they're not always seen as the best teams in the SEC, Mississippi State, they still have some really good players. And the SEC has done a really good job over the past few years getting themselves back up to being one of the best premier college basketball conference. They're always been known as the college football conference. Obviously, Florida beating Houston in the national championship last year. You can make the argument that SEC had the best season of college basketball ever last season, getting as many teams as they did in the tournament. So we'll see how that one goes for Kansas State. Their guard, Josh Hubbard, is their leading scorer. They kind of have a PJ Haggerty-like guard in Josh Hubbard when it comes to how many points he scores and discrepancy down to the next one. Josh Hubbard averages 22.3 points per game. And then their second best scorer, Sean Jones Jr., only scores about 12 points per game. So if you can slow down Josh Hubbard, I mean, that's the way that you'll have a really good time and take care of Kansas State's basketball, limit the turnovers, obviously good shooting. If you can have some good 3-point shooting, then this one could go in your favor. But if Hubbard goes off, if they struggle defensively and they have another night shooting like they did against Tulsa, then you might be in for some trouble. So that's obviously a big one. And this will be a true test. And it'll be a huge test, because after that, then you go on the road and you take on Indiana, which is going to be the toughest non-conference matchup you have all season long. And that one's going to be really tough. So if you can really kind of warm this one up, have a good game against Mississippi State at the T-Mobile Center, and find a way to get that win, move to 5-0, and get ready to take on Indiana in their house. That's going to be a crazy environment. It's always nuts there. Then that'll be obviously the truest test to see what kind of team this Kansas State team has. And with the fact that even if you make that one close, that Indiana game could even be seen as a quad 1 loss or win, depending on what happens with that one next week. That's where I think Indiana winds up when it's all said and done, probably in that quad 1, quad 2 at the very lowest. All right, let me know what you think in the comment description below, what you thought about this game. I thought that this was a game that they needed to close out, but they couldn't, but they still found a way to get the victory, right? So they got to find a way to do better at this towards the end of these games. They struggle with Cal, they struggle with Tulsa. That won't go. good against Mississippi State and definitely won't go good against Indiana. But ultimately, you're 4-0, and that's the only thing that really matters when it's all said and done, especially in the eyes of the committee. If you can have a strong non-conference record when it's all said and done, getting ready for Big 12 play. I appreciate you making Locked On Kansas State your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Big 12. Drake Toll has you covered, everything under the sun when it comes to this conference, and college football season's getting down to the end. Who's going to Arlington? Drake Toll has you covered, as he always does. Please like the video, please subscribe, and we'll see you back here next time, right here on Locked On Kansas State.